let's talk about carbohydrates, shall we? So what are carbs and what do they do in the body? So carbs function as a source of energy for our cells. So when you're eating carbs, they get broken down into smaller compounds, and particularly different types of sugars or glucose. And this glucose provides fuel for the cells that gets transported through the mitochondria, and we make energy from that glucose. Now, excess carbohydrates are stored in the form of glycogen in the liver and in the muscle. The other excess amount of that is also stored in the fat. So when we fill up the muscle and the liver, the rest of the fat, or the rest of the glucose or carbohydrates, gets stored in fat tissues. So when you don't eat enough carbohydrates, it turns out that the glycogen from the liver gets broken down. Not so much the muscle, but certainly the glycogen from the liver stores. So when you're on a weight loss program and in the first week or two you lose a lot of weight, well, your body's breaking down those glycogen stores. And with every one of those molecules of glycogen is a lot of water. So you're losing the fluid, but you're also starting to lose that glycogen. We see a lot of that, and I see a lot of that in keto diets. So there are certain types of carbohydrates that also play a key role in our digestion. So they help with digestion, they help with our heart, they help with brain, and most of that, those are the things that we see with those carbs are going to be the fiber, the phytonutrients, the phytochemicals in those. But when we are not eating those sorts of foods, then we start to see a whole lot of other things change in the body. So then it gets to be about what are the good carbs, what are the bad carbs, right? And how do we tell the difference? It's important that we understand the types of carbs because the types will dictate how the body responds to those carbs. So, for example, whole, unprocessed carbs are considered healthy carbs. Some examples of those are something like a sweet potato or some bananas or some legumes, dates. Dates have tons of nutrients in them. They're very sweet, but because of the nutrient factor, they are not as bad as, say, something like some white pasta. So all of these foods have their nutrients intact. So when we look at those foods, it's what is the nutritional value of those, and are they devoid of nutrition? And those are the foods we pretty much don't want to do. So refined carbohydrates are foods without the fiber and without the nutrient value, as they have been altered in a way through processing. And those are the things that have an impact on our body, including things like fruit drinks. I'm always so surprised when people are drinking fruit juices. It's really looking at a fruit-flavored sugary water, and they don't do us any good whatsoever. In fact, you're not getting any nutritional value from fruit drinks. White flour, of course, white rice. We're going to talk a little bit more about that a little later. But pasta, pastries, all of those things have been highly refined, and they have such a major impact on our body. So if we look at carbohydrates, there are four groups of them. It's vegetables first, the most important thing. And you've heard me say this enough times, is that we need the vegetables because, and the fruits, but the vegetables particularly because they have this high level of phytonutrients and phytochemicals in them. Of course, they've got all the vitamins and all the antioxidants as well, plus the fiber. But those phytochemicals are important because they are antioxidants, they're antimicrobial, they're antiviral, they turn on our healthy genes, they repair our cells, they're important for reducing inflammation, and they support our immunity. We need those phytochemicals. Fruits also have a high amount of phytochemicals, but again, we want to watch how much of that we eat. So dried fruit is very high in glucose and will raise our blood sugar. So you would be better off having something like apples and pears, or even the berries. Of course, the berries are extremely important because they have a high amount of those phytochemicals, but they don't raise your blood sugar as much as, say, the banana would. The next thing are the legumes. So legumes are beans, lentils, peas. All of those things have a high amount of fiber. And for some people, they are fine, but for other people, digesting them gets to be problematic. Then we move to the grains, and the grains can be broken down into two categories. One is the gluten-containing grains, and these are anything that's made from wheat or rye or barley, but predominantly wheat. I don't see too many people eating rye or barley foods in this area. But the wheat is where we have all of the breads, the pastas, the cookies, the cakes, the cereals, all of that is pretty much a wheat-based. And then the non-gluten grains are going to be amaranth, buckwheat, corn, millet, gluten-free oats, quinoa, rices, all the different types of rice, teff, sorghum. So those are the non-gluten grains. So then the question is, well, we know we've got to eat a lot of the vegetables. That's a carbohydrate. But how much of the other carbs can we eat? And this is all over the place. When everybody's doing low-carb diets, is how much carbs should I be eating? And I want to emphasize this point is that everybody's need for carbs is going to be very different. Your genes are absolutely unique to you. No one has those genes on this planet. So you're such a unique person. So how many carbs you need is going to be very different to, say, your colleagues. So if we're looking at someone who's just wanting to slim down a little, lose a bit of weight, anywhere from 100 to 150 grams of carbs. But if you have some other metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes or extreme weight gain, or you're looking at focus and mood, inflammation, all of those, then you probably want to reduce the carbs down to 60 to 90 grams per day. So there are people that have become what we know as carb intolerant. What it means is that these people, I'm one of these actually, lack a certain amount of digestive enzymes to break down carbs. So we're the kind of people that eat the carbs, we start to feel very full, we feel bloated, we pack on the weight very quickly if we're eating them. I feel sometimes I just look at them and there's a pound on my hips. So when we look at, then we want to be, and that kind of thing is called carb intolerance or carb resistance. Okay. So the thing about carbs too is quality. Quality is really, really important. So you're looking for things that don't have any additives or preservatives or fillers or sweeteners. The bottom line to this is if you can't pronounce or recognize anything originating from nature, you don't want to eat it. So this is more the packaged foods, right? And then the quality, you know, the body processes whole foods more efficiently than it processes grains and sugar. And the other part about the quality of carbs, it should contain both the phytonutrients and the fiber. It needs to be unprocessed and needs to come. And so the other thing about unprocessed foods is it's a very short distance from the field to the fork. I love that saying. Unprocessed foods, meaning it's a very short distance from the field to the fork. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about something like broccoli. Broccoli is not processed at all. Comes straight from the field to your fork. And there's a quote from Mark Hyman that I love. If your food took a pit stop in a factory, you may want to reconsider eating it. I love that saying. You know, there are some exceptions. So something like canned tomatoes, or if you were looking at artichokes that were put into a bottle of oil, that's not that processed. So another thing about the grains. So again, we're talking about reducing the grains really essentially, because I don't hear anyone tell me that they overeat on broccoli. But certainly the pasta, the bread, the cookies is where we see the problem, right? So the problem about grains, they also contain mold and other toxins, and these can rob you of your energy. They can also promote brain fog. What they also contain are lectins. So lectins are proteins that can bind to cell membranes, and they cause inflammation. Our bodies definitely don't digest lectins well. And so nearly everyone has some level of antibodies to these lectins. And if you have reactions, or if you have some other issues, like maybe you have digestive issues, or you have a leaky gut, or you have some autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's, you definitely want to watch the amount of lectins you consume, because they promote more inflammation through the body. Now, I wanted to go back and talk to you a little bit about rice. So this would be the exception to the rule as far as the grains are concerned. And rice makes this particular resistant starch. A resistant starch is a particular starch that bacteria convert into something called short-chain fatty acids. So your gut bacteria do really well with white rice. But how it works is you cook the white rice, and then you put it in the fridge and rest that rice for 12 hours. Then you can reheat it, and you can have it with a meal. And the reason for this is that resting period of rice, the starch changes, and it becomes very beneficial from a gut bacteria point of view, but it also lowers the calories and the insulin-raising ability. So not only is it good for gut bacteria, but it has lower calories, and it doesn't raise your insulin or blood sugar as much as if you were using some other grain, or when you started this rice in the beginning. So it's what we call a resistant starch. So you can use that sometime and think about it. Now, when we start to look at low carbs, there's been a lot of studies around that, and some of the benefits have been weight loss, or more importantly, fat loss. To me, the fat loss is more of an importance than the weight on the scale. And the reason for that is we have these layers of fat that surround the body. And as we put on more weight, those layers get thicker and thicker. And I would rather see those layers diminish than the weight on the scale. So for me and my patients, the belt notch is a much better indication of what's happening to the body, and also even a change in your clothing. So if you were measuring a pair of trousers, that would be the goal for reducing fat loss. Much more important. So body composition is more important than the weight on the scale. Here's an example why. If you're taking medication, then the body will sometimes hold on to more fluid, so the next day you get on the scale and you're seeing an increase in weight, and then there's a whole issue around what's going on, and I've gained weight and all the rest. So I never want to promote the scale weight. So the other thing about low-carb diets, they help with blood sugar control. You know, insulin resistance is linked with almost every disease we know. There's an improved brain function. It actually helps with energy, and it helps to reduce inflammation. Now, if you're doing a low-carb diet and you add more fats to that, it helps support hormone control, helps with cravings, helps with satiation. You know that you feel satiated when you've eaten something that has high fat in it, and it helps you keep full. So when we look at the amounts of carbs that people should be having, there's a moderately low carb diet, and that's when you eat high fat with about 100 to 150 grams of net carbs a day. So what are net carbs, you ask? Well, if you have a total amount of carbohydrates, and if you think about a label, it says something like 20 grams of carbs, and then down the line it'll say fiber is at 10 grams of carbs. It actually says fiber 10 grams. And if you subtract the fiber from the carbohydrate, you will have 20 minus the 10 of fiber. You will have 10 grams of net carbs. That's what they talk about. They're taking the fiber away from that. So a moderately low-carb diet is anywhere from 100 to 150 grams of net carbs a day. There's a whole bunch of things around cyclic carbohydrates, and that's part of the keto diet, and I'll talk more about that on Thursday. But for other people, if they're doing a full keto diet, that's sort of under 50 grams of carbs, even as low as 20 grams. So for each person, it's very different, and we always want to find the thing that works best for you. Sometimes having a little bit more carb in the diet, not as low as some of the keto diets, works better for sleep and hormone control, especially for women. And also the timing when you eat those carbs is important. So if we go back and think about this, you want to make sure that most of your carbs are coming from vegetables. Want to reduce the carbohydrate load from grains, and look at how much you're consuming, how many carbs you're having. And the best way to do that is to track it with an app. And my recommendation to you is see how much you're eating in a week. So track everything. Don't make any changes just yet. Track everything you're eating and just see how many carbs, how many protein, and how many fats you're eating in a day and a week. It's just good information. And then you can start to cut down your carbs and see how you feel with that. So you can go from 100 or 150, play around that area for a bit, and see how it works for you. So carbs, when we're thinking about them, don't throw out the carbs with the vegetables. The vegetables play a huge role, as you've heard me say often enough. I saw a great recipe on Bon Appetit the other day, and it was a lentil niçoise salad. And if you want this, I can send it to you, but it's got eggs in it and asparagus, and then it's got 4 cups of radishes with fennel and tomatoes. So all those phytochemicals from those foods are brilliant. And then it's got 3 cups of cooked lentils. And you can replace the lentils, if you're not so crazy about them, with some tuna or some chicken or even some steak if you wanted to do that. And then it's got some of the other things that really make it look so pretty and delicious. It's got olives and caper berries and pepperoncinis, pickles, or anything that's sort of briny that gives you that umami flavor in the mouth. So if you want those, send me an email, and I can get that off to you. Now, if you've got any questions about the conversation around carbs, now would be a good time to unmute, and I'll answer them if I can.